At 78, Arnold Schwarzenegger finally reveals the 5 bodybuilders he regretted the most. Most people have never seen it. It was taken backstage at the 1980 Mr. Olympia. Arnold Schwarzenegger, retired for 5 years, is standing in the pump-up room. His arms are crossed, his jaw is set like concrete, and Mike Mentzer is 3 feet away from him, staring, not with admiration, with fury, because Mike Mentzer knew that what was about to happen on that stage was wrong, that the outcome had already been decided before a single pose was struck, that the man in the shadows, Arnold himself, had pulled strings that would unravel 5 careers, 5 lives, 5 legacies. Now, at 78 years old, with nothing left to prove and no political game left to play, Arnold sat down and told the truth. He named names. He said he was sorry. And some of those men can no longer hear it. This is the story of 5 bodybuilders Arnold Schwarzenegger carries with him. 5 men whose fates were tangled with his. 5 regrets from a man who spent his whole life pretending he had none. Stay with me, because some of these stories will break your heart. To understand why Arnold's regrets matter, you have to understand what Arnold was. Not the movie star, not the governor, the animal. In the late 1960s and through the 1970s, bodybuilding wasn't a mainstream sport. It wasn't Instagram fitness. It wasn't sponsored protein shakes. It was dark gyms. It was Venice Beach at 6 a.m. It was grown men pushing their bodies to places medicine hadn't mapped yet. And Arnold Schwarzenegger ruled all of it. He won the Mr. Olympia 7 times. 7, he made the sport. He made the culture. When pumping iron came out in 1977, he didn't just become famous, he became mythology. But mythology has a cost. Because when one man becomes that powerful, everyone else casts a shadow behind him. And some of those men in the shadow were better than the story lets on. Some of them were cheated. Some of them were broken. Some of them were simply forgotten. And Arnold, now white-haired, 78, facing the back half of his life, has started talking about it. Not in press releases, not in Netflix documentaries with smooth lighting and soft music, in raw interviews, in podcast seats, in letters he never meant to go public. He said, and I'm paraphrasing because the words hit differently when you hear them in his voice, "There are men from my era who deserved more, and I didn't give it to them. Some of that was ego. Some of it was competition. Some of it I still don't fully understand. That's not PR damage control. That's a man doing accounting, spiritual accounting, and the bill is long. Number 1, Mike Mentzer. Let's start where it hurts the most. Mike Mentzer was not just a bodybuilder. He was a philosopher, a man who approached muscle like a mathematician. His heavy-duty training system was revolutionary, low volume, high intensity, scientifically precise. In 1979, Mentzer won the Mr. Olympia heavyweight division with a perfect score, a 300 out of 300, the first perfect score in the history of the competition. He was supposed to win it all in 1980. Then Arnold came back, retired, 5 years gone, barely prepared. And somehow, Arnold won. Mentzer finished fifth. The bodybuilding world exploded. Our judges were accused of bias. Conspiracy theories ran through the sport like wildfire, and Mike Mentzer, a man who had earned that title, watched someone else take it with politics and legend instead of conditioning. Arnold has since admitted in carefully chosen words that he was not in his best shape at the 1980 Olympia, that the judging was unusual, that Mentzer deserved better. But here's what Arnold doesn't say outright, and what the bodybuilding community has never forgotten. Arnold lobbied. He whispered in ears. He worked the room. Mentzer spiraled after 1980. He became increasingly isolated. He argued with promoters, with fans, with the entire establishment. He retreated into philosophy, into darkness. In June 2001, Mike Mentzer died alone in his apartment in California. He was 49. His brother Ray, also a bodybuilder, died 2 days later. 2 brothers, 2 days, gone. And Arnold carries that. You can see it in how he pauses when Mentzer's name comes up. That particular silence. That specific wait. Number 2, Sergio Oliva. They called him the Myth. And the nickname wasn't flattery. It was accuracy. Sergio Oliva was built like nothing the sport had ever seen. three-time Mr. Olympia, a Cuban immigrant who defected during a weightlifting competition by simply not getting back on the bus. He came to America with nothing and built a body that made Arnold reportedly tell a journalist, "When I saw Sergio, I wanted to quit." That's not a small thing for Arnold to say. But here's what happened. In 1969, Sergio and Arnold stood on the same Olympia stage. The judges gave it to Arnold. Many people at the time, and historians since, have argued Sergio should have won. Oliva spent the rest of his career defined by that loss, not celebrated for his 3 titles, not honored for his immigrant story, but reduced to the guy Arnold beat. He deserved a statue. He got a footnote. Arnold has spoken about Sergio with something that doesn't come naturally to him: guilt. He said Sergio was the most naturally gifted bodybuilder he ever saw. The word naturally is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Sergio Oliva died in 2012. He was 71. He never got the full recognition he deserved while he was alive. Number 3, Danny Padilla. You might not know this name. That's exactly the problem. Danny Padilla stood 5 feet 2 inches. They called him the Giant Killer. He competed against men who outweighed him by 40, 50, or 60 pounds, and he beat them. He had proportions that seemed physically impossible, a waist so small that his lats looked like wings, an X-frame that textbooks should have been written about. But the 1970s and 80s bodybuilding circuit rewarded mass, size, volume, and Danny Padilla, brilliant, disciplined, criminally underrated, kept getting passed over. Arnold has said Padilla was one of the most aesthetically perfect bodybuilders he ever competed alongside, and never once pushed the judges or the media to give Padilla his due. In an era where Arnold's word was gospel, one public endorsement might have changed Danny Padilla's career. It never came. Not when it mattered. I want you to pause on something. These aren't just bodybuilding politics. These are men's lives, their self-worth, their financial stability, their legacy for their families. When you're passed over at the highest level of your sport, the sport you sacrificed everything for, it doesn't just sting. It restructures who you are. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, whether by design or by the blind arrogance of greatness, was at the center of all of it. Now, back to the list. Number 4, Frank Zane. Frank Zane is one of the few men on this list who did win the Olympia 3 times, and he deserved every title. But here's where the regret lives. Zane was the last of a breed. He represented aesthetics over mass, symmetry over size, art over brute force. And when the sport evolved, when the mass monsters took over in the late 80s and 90s, Frank Zane's legacy was quietly buried under 300-pound behemoths who could barely walk. Arnold watched it happen. Arnold, who could have used his massive cultural influence to protect the aesthetic era, to lobby for judging criteria that honored proportion, said nothing. He moved to Hollywood. He chased bigger things. And the sport that Frank Zane had helped elevate turned into something neither of them recognized. Zane has spoken about this with sadness, not bitterness. He's philosophical, gracious. But Arnold? Arnold has said directly that he regrets not fighting harder to protect the soul of the sport when he had the power to do so. That's not a small admission. That's a king admitting he abandoned his kingdom. Number 5, Boyer Coe. Boyer Coe was relentless. He competed for over 2 decades. He stood on the Olympia stage 9 times. He had a physique that was technically near perfect, and he never won. Not once. He came close. He was consistently top 5, but the title never came. And here's what makes it tragic. Boyer Coe competed in Arnold's shadow, literally. His peak competitive years overlapped almost perfectly with Arnold's dominance. Every time he peaked, Arnold was there. Or Arnold's legacy was there, shaping how the judges saw everything. Coe once said the sport was political in ways that had nothing to do with your body. He wasn't wrong. Arnold has acknowledged Coe as one of the most criminally underappreciated competitors of the golden era, a man who deserved, at minimum, 1 Olympia title, and was denied it by timing, politics, and the gravitational pull of one man's legend. Here's what doesn't make the highlight reels. Mike Mentzer, brilliant and broken, dying alone at 49. Sergio Oliva, 3-time champion. He's spending his final years as a security guard in Chicago. Danny Padilla, one of the most gifted bodybuilders who ever lived, largely forgotten outside hardcore circles. Zane, watching the sport he loved become unrecognizable. Boyer Co., still gracious, still talking about the sport he loved, but still carrying the weight of that missing title. These are the men on the other side of Arnold's legacy. And now, at 78, having survived a heart defect that required open-heart surgery, having watched his own mortality become very, very real, Arnold has started saying things he never said before. In a 2023 interview, he said, "I was selfish. I needed to get where I went. But selfish has a price, and other people pay it." That sentence should be carved somewhere, because that's not the Terminator talking. That's not the action hero. That's a man in his late 70s, doing the only thing left to do when your body starts slowing down and your mind starts looking backward. Reckoning. There's a concept in psychology called ego dissolution. It doesn't require drugs or meditation. Sometimes it just requires age. The slow, humbling recognition that the story you told yourself about who you were was incomplete. Arnold built his entire identity on winning, on dominance, on the idea that the strongest man in the room deserves everything the room has to offer. He's not sure he believes that anymore. And the men on this list, some gone, some still here, are the evidence he can't ignore. What does it mean to win a sport if winning required standing on the shoulders of men who were never thanked? What does a legacy mean if the people closest to it remember it differently than the history books do? Arnold doesn't have clean answers. At 78, he's stopped pretending he does. There's something that happens to great men when they get old. The armor comes off. Not because they choose it, because the body insists. Arnold Schwarzenegger spent 60 years being the strongest man in the room. Physically, politically, culturally. The man who never blinked, never backed down, never admitted the cost of his victories. But costs don't disappear because you refuse to look at them. They accumulate. And at 78, standing in the ruins of an era that's never coming back, surrounded by the ghosts of men who gave everything to a sport that gave some of them very little in return, Arnold is looking. The iron doesn't lie. That was always his philosophy. The iron shows you exactly what you are. It turns out that applies to more than muscle. It applies to character, to loyalty, to what you do with power when you have it and what you become when it's gone. 5 men, 5 lives, 5 regrets that no amount of money, no Oscar nomination, no governorship, no sequel cocksake can undo. The champion's record is permanent. So is the damage. Remember that.